When we talk about Native American or Indian history in Ohio, we need to start back about 13,000 years ago. 13,000 years ago, Ohio looked a lot different than it does today because that's the end of the last ice age. And as that last glacier was melting through Ohio, and actually was happening right where we are today, we started to see people come into Ohio following the herds of a lot different kind of animals that we had at that time. This is a time of the mastodon and mammoth and saber-toothed cats and giant beaver. And the culture that was here was a great hunting culture, very nomadic, followed the herds of animals. And about 13,000 years ago, we call that group of people Paleo Indians. Now, might mention as we talk about all these different prehistoric cultures, these are all names that we've given to these people. Because being prehistoric, they don't have a written language that we're aware of. So these are all our names. The name Paleo Indian, all that means is really old Indian. And that culture was about, as I said, about 13,000 years ago. Well, at that time, that hunting, they were the hunters, that lasted about 5,000 years. And then we move up into the next culture about 8,000 years ago, called Archaic, and they went from hunters to hunters and gatherers. They realized that the forest supplied them food as well. So now they were still hunting animals, but they were hunting different animals than what the Paleo Indians were, because by 8,000 years ago, Ohio looked about like it does today with the same kind of culture. So now we're seeing animals, if we would go back 8,000 years, we'd see animals we're familiar with today. As things continued to change, as the climate still began to warm a little bit more, people stayed here and adapted to the world they found themselves in. And about another, 5,000 years or so, we got to what we call the woodland cultures. Ohio by then is basically covered by hardwood forests. And these are people that are living in the forest. And this is a time when we start to see not just hunting and gathering, but we start to see a little bit of agriculture show up, just a little. And we start to see mound building began about that time. And during this woodland period, we have two big cultures. We have the Adena and we have the Hopewell. Those were the two mound building cultures. Then about 1,000 years after that, or a little bit more than that, something happened in Ohio. These great prehistoric cultures disappeared. We don't know why, but mound building stopped, trade stopped, and people began to build for the very first time walls around their villages. So something had happened drastically in Ohio that changed all of this lifestyle. And then as we start to see a cultural resurgence toward the end of this time period, 1492 happened. And our ancestors started to show up. And when that happened, then the prehistoric cultures started another disintegration again. We start to see another relapse of culture, you might say. And also what we start to see happening is the prehistoric era ended. Because you think about the only difference between prehistoric people and what we refer to as historic people are us. Because when our ancestors got here, they started to write the stories of what they were finding. And in Ohio, the prehistoric era ends in 1654. We can pinpoint that pretty closely. Because in 1654, you start to have French traders coming into Ohio. And with those traders who were basically not illegitimate, illiterate people, were also Jesuit priests. And they were starting to write down the stories of what we had. So the prehistoric era in Ohio began 13,000 years ago and ended in 1654.